Alright, what's going on, guys? It is your boy TKD123 here, back again here on PlayStation Source. And of course, there's a little game coming out called Ratchet Clank Rift Apart. Of course, by the way, if for some reason you aren't picking up the game, you can watch me stream it. I'll be streaming it live, my full playthrough, my full first playthrough, Ratchet Clank Rift Apart stream series starting Thursday night. Get hyped for that. Cannot wait for Thursday night for that game to unlock on my PS5. But you know, Ratchet Clank Rift Apart is of course a new installment in the very long Ratchet & Clank game series that spans all the way back into 2002, with the first game releasing on PlayStation 2. And so of course there's a lot going on here, and I did want to make a video to kind of just encapsulate and catch everyone up to speed if you don't have time to play all the games, etc. Right? So just to be very clear here, this is not going to be a full in-depth video where you're going to be able to understand every single little Easter egg and every single little tidbit that is brought up in Rift Apart. This is supposed to catch you up to speed on the main core elements that I think are going to be necessary to understand Rift Apart's plot based on what we had so far. So if there's stuff that is in Rift Apart after you watch this video that you don't understand, you know, maybe that was something that I just didn't bring up and that I didn't think would be a big deal. And so this is going to be a just main core thing involving the main plot. We're going to talk about the Dimensionator. We're going to talk about the Lombax race. We're going to talk about the Zoni. We're going to talk about Ratchet's heritage, Clank's heritage, Dr. Nefarious, etc. So let's get right into it. And before we get started, listen, man, look, I'm a busy guy. I have a, you know, main side job where I make my money and everything, but you know, this video took a little bit of effort. So definitely, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like on it, subscribe, all that great stuff. Let's get right into it here. So of course, Ratchet & Clank did start in 2002. It was a platforming franchise since PlayStation 2 era, with lighthearted storylines, fun characters, some crude adult humor here and there, and of course, over the top guns and gunplay within the series. The game series, of course, stars PlayStation mascot fame and dynamic duo Ratchet and Clank as they go on countless adventures, defeating enemies, having funny moments, and saving the galaxy a time or two. The main character you play as is of course Ratchet. He is a Lombax, which makes him highly skillful in technology and engineering, along with being a very powerful warrior as well. Now what makes Ratchet interesting is that he is the last Lombax in this dimension, kind of. We do see some Lombaxes in the game series as a whole, specifically one being Alistair in A Crack in Time, and now I'm sure you guys know as well Rivet, even though Rivet is from a different dimension. Overall, when we're talking about the main core dimension, the main timeline, Ratchet is the last Lombax, and there's a reason for that. The fate of Ratchet's people lies in the history of the Great War. The Great War was a fierce conflict between the Lombaxes and this other species called the Kragmites that occurred in the Polaris galaxy eons before the series. Being advanced in technology and development, the Lombaxes created the device called the Dimensionator that successfully ended the war by locking the Kragmites away in another dimension. We'll touch on the Dimensionator and the nature of the Lombax race in a little bit, but let's touch on Clank next up here. So Clank, however, is a defective sentry bot physically, but his soul was created by Orvis, the leader of the Zoni, thus making Clank, yes, a robot, but also part Zoni. And with being a Zoni, you have the ability to manipulate time and space to your will. More on that a little bit later as well, because that's very important. Clank, being a Zoni, was entrusted by his creator Orvis to take over the Great Clock, which is this facility at the center of the universe that is meant to maintain the temporal normality across the universe. Clank was going to stay as the overseer of the Great Clock, as Orvis wanted him to do at the end of A Crack in Time. However, Clank opted to stay with Ratchet until Ratchet can see his fellow Lombaxes, just as Clank was able to see his fellow Zoni and connect with them. Again, we'll talk a little bit more about where the Lombax race is in this whole thing, because it'll make a lot more sense once I get through the kind of backstory of Tools of Destruction. So once again, you're asking, you know, what is the Dimensionator? Where did the Lombaxes go? Let's sit down and let's talk about it here, okay? This all ties to the Dimensionator, like we mentioned before. In Tools of Destruction, where we get the backstory about the Kragmites and the Great War and all that, where during the Great War, the Lombaxes were able to defeat the Kragmites by using the Dimensionator to send them to a different dimension. Time went on and the Lombaxes were able to live in peace without the Kragmites being on Fastoon, their home planet. But the Lombaxes found a single Kragmite frozen in the bottom of Fastoon years and decades and maybe hundreds of years later after the events of the Great War. They decided to raise this single Kragmite named Tachyon as a Lombax and entrusted him with the technology, skills, and information of the Lombax race, even though he was a Kragmite. However, when Tachyon got older and learned of the history of the Great War and that the Lombaxes were responsible for the exiling of the Kragmite race, his people, he turned on the Lombaxes in hopes to seek revenge against his people, his fellow Kragmites. He raised the Imperial army by persuading them with Raritanium and providing them with weapons and robotics, which were Lombax tech that was stolen by pirates, and just weapons and technology that Tachyon was able to develop himself based off of the information that the Lombaxes gave him growing up. After he raised the Imperial army, he launched an attack on Fastoon that caused the surviving Lombaxes to use the Dimensionator once more to flee the attack from the Imperial army led by Tachyon. So the keeper of the Dimensionator, turned out it was Ratchet's father, and Ratchet's father were the only two Lombaxes that stayed behind, while Ratchet's father used the Dimensionator to send the rest of the Lombaxes to another dimension to escape from being killed. And so Ratchet was an infant at this point, so he has no recollection of this entire thing happening, and it was Tachyon that killed Ratchet's father in that whole ordeal. And the reason why Tachyon only killed Ratchet's father and not Ratchet himself was because Ratchet's dad sent Ratchet over to the Solana Galaxy, where Ratchet would be raised on planet Veldin, where we find him in the first Ratchet Clank game back in 2002. And so, side note, it is really neat to think, like, why would Ratchet's dad not, just let Ratchet go with the other Lombaxes in that dimension? And maybe it was because, Ratchet's dad had hope that Ratchet would eventually rise and grow up and be able to, defeat Tachyon, because it was a losing battle at that point, and maybe he would also be able to restore the Lombaxes to their home galaxy on Polaris Galaxy. Maybe that could be totally plausible. We will have to see when Rift Apart comes out. But as Ratchet was being raised on planet Veldin in the Solana Galaxy, Tachyon was in the Polaris Galaxy, still raising up his Imperial army after the defeat of the Lombaxes and assuming control of that home planet. Eventually, Ratchet and Clank bump heads with Tachyon and the Imperial army, where they are also seeking the Dimensionator in Tools of Destruction to stop Tachyon's expansion. However, at that point, they are not aware that the Dimensionator is a dimensional device. Actually, they don't even know that it's the Dimensionator. It is called the Big Lombax Secret, and it's been fabled to be a weapon. But once they start to unravel, and once the game goes on and they start to learn of the Dimensionator's true nature and the whole backstory of it, this causes a little bit of conflict with Ratchet and Clank themselves, and they start to butt heads during Tools of Destruction, because when they discover the Dimensionator's true nature, Ratchet wants to use it to bring back the Lombaxes, while Clank is visited by the Zoni, right, his true nature, where that's where we get the initial, name drop of the Zoni, and we know that information from the game series. The Zoni warned Clank that to use the Dimensionator could be very, very dangerous due to its power. This, of course, angers Ratchet when Clank is trying to tell Ratchet don't use the Dimensionator to bring back the Lombaxes because it's dangerous. Ratchet is obviously angered at that because he just wants to bring back his people. He wants to meet the Lombaxes. He wants to be amongst his people, and you can't really blame him for that. But they go through the events of the game, defeating Tachyon, and Ratchet realizes that the Dimensionator is truly a dangerous thing that should not be used, and then it was placed in a museum at the end of the game, which will then be seen in the game Into the Nexus, which we will get to in a little bit. Now, I know this is awkward, but we're going to pivot towards the backstory for Dr. Nefarious, just because he's very important to, of course, Rift Apart and the future of the series overall, and the Dimensionator is, of course, integral to that as well. But we'll leave the Dimensionator at the museum and we'll pick it up in the Into the Nexus section of this video. But let's quickly go over Dr. Nefarious, okay? He is the main villain of the series, okay? Of course, we have Tachyon. He's a very, very big villain, but overall, Dr. Nefarious is definitely the main villain of the Ratchet and Clank series. He was bullied throughout his childhood by none other than Captain Cork, another Ratchet and Clank main character, but even in Nefarious's young age, he always hated organic life. He has some sort of stigma, just does not like the average organic life life form and prefers robot life essentially, right? So later in life, Nefarious tries to exterminate all life in this planet called Rilgar in Blackwater City, only to be stopped by Captain Quark. He vowed to return to the city once again to assume what he was trying to do, but a few days later, Captain Quark and Nefarious have a confrontation. I mean, you can call it a confrontation. It's kind of messed up because, you know, like Captain Quark was always giving Dr. Nefarious wedgies and everything growing up and just being just an overall just bully towards Dr. Nefarious, even though, you know, Dr. Nefarious is a bad guy, right? So Captain Quark goes over to Dr. Nefarious and just wants to give him a wedgie, but this wedgie causes Dr. Nefarious to fall into a piece of machinery. Captain Quark thinks that Dr. Nefarious is dead in this point because he falls into this machinery. Captain Quark thinks that he's dead. He ends up leaving, but Dr. Nefarious actually turns into a robot via this machinery that he was working on that Captain Quark accidentally pushed him into, right? So this is where we get Dr. Nefarious becoming a robot, and throughout the future from this point, Dr. Nefarious is constantly trying to make a universe that is suited for robots as opposed to being suited for organic life, which is where they eventually butt heads with Ratchet and Clank, because Ratchet and Clank is trying to stop Dr. Nefarious from doing that, and that's essentially where we get Dr. Nefarious into the overall story, okay? He's trying to make a universe full of robots where he sees that robots are the better life form as opposed to organic life form. Alright, so now we'll pivot back to, of course, Ratchet and Clank into the Nexus. This is where we see the Dimensionator next time, and the game's main plot follows a character named Vendra Prague, who was able to create a knockoff Dimensionator to summon a powerful entity called Mr. I into the main Ratchet and Clank universe. Mr. I turns on Vendra and sends her to the Netherverse and starts wreaking havoc on Ratchet and Clank's main dimension. Neftin Prague, which is Vendra's brother, helps Ratchet and Clank repair the original Dimensionator to send Mr. I out of their dimension and bring back Vendra from the Netherverse. Okay, so that's the main plot of Into the Nexus. Not a huge deal overall, but by the end of the game, the Dimensionator is damaged once again, and Clank questioned if Ratchet would ever repair it to bring back the Lombaxes. Ratchet declined, believing he had everything he needed in this universe already. As Ratchet leaves the room, Clank secretly takes the Dimensionator away to be seen in Rift Apart. Which brings us, of course, to the introduction to Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Clank repairs the Dimensionator and offers it to Ratchet so he can find the Lombaxes. However, Dr. Nefarious steals the newly fixed Dimensionator and uses it to go to a dimension where he always wins. As Ratchet tries to stop Dr. Nefarious from using the Dimensionator, Ratchet shoots the core of the Dimensionator, causing it to malfunction, and accidentally causes a catastrophic dimensional collapse that causes multiple locations and realities and dimensions to mix, thus giving us the main plot point of Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart. Okay, so that's essentially where it pretty much ends here. That's really where we got going until we get the full Rift Apart game on Thursday. But the main question I have for everyone here is, why do you think Clank is okay with using the Dimensionator now when he clearly wasn't okay with it during Tools of Destruction and everything, right? And it's really, you know, solidified in A Crack in Time as well. But we see this turn with Into the Nexus where Clank actually takes the Dimensionator and fixes it himself so that Ratchet can see the Lombax race, right? So why would he do that? I think the answer to this question is going to be told in Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, but overall, just from me, just thinking right now, I feel like, you know, Clank had a change of heart, right? Like, I think Clank just wants Ratchet to, you know, see his people and have that same satisfaction in the same vein that Clank had that satisfaction in Tools of Destruction and A Crack in Time, where he was able to be more familiar with the Zoni and Orvis and his whole place in this universe, right? So I believe that Clank just wants that for his best friend Ratchet. But what do you guys think? How do you guys feel about the overall story? Do you like it? Do you hate it? Do you can't wait to play Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and make sure also while you are down there, check out our description where you can find links to our Discord, our Twitter, and the Anchor link that way you can listen to a long form content in podcast format. Those of course being Save Slot Podcast every Sunday, and of course Road to Rift Apart, which will be having David K on the show on Friday. It's going to be a great time. Definitely don't miss it if you love Ratchet & Clank, and if you want to hear our first impressions about the game, definitely check out Road to Rift Apart episode 10 going live this Friday. Thank you all for watching, and as always, greatness awaits.